Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny was a major failure that was many years in the works. Over the course of 15 years, it was rescheduled several times, ran into a host of problems while shooting, and took the spot as one of the most expensive movies of all time and one of the biggest box office bombs of 2023. So today, I want to revisit this mess of a film to explore the troubled production, offer up some theories on why it failed commercially, and explain why I think it is such a poor Indiana Jones movie. The development for a fifth Indiana Jones movie can be traced back to 2008. Right around the time Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was released, George Lucas began researching a potential plot device for a new film, with Spielberg intent on directing. However, there were some disagreements on what direction to take this franchise. Here's a quote from Lucas in 2008. "If I can come up with another idea that they like, we'll do another. Really, with the last one, Steven wasn't that enthusiastic. I was trying to persuade him, but now Steve is more amenable to doing another one. Yet we still have the issues about the direction we'd like to take. I'm in the future, Steven's in the past. He's trying to drag it back to the way they were. I'm trying to push it into a whole different space. So still, we have a sort of tension. This recent one came out of that. It's kind of a hybrid of our own two ideas. So we'll see where we're able to take this next one." Work continued on this film for the next 2 years, although no plot details or timeline were revealed. However, work on this iteration of the film stalled in 2012, when Disney acquired the rights to the series along with Star Wars when they purchased Lucasfilm. A year later, Disney also bought the marketing and distribution rights for Indiana Jones from Paramount Pictures, indicating that there would be a fifth film, although Disney said they were going to focus on the Star Wars brand before continuing the Indiana Jones franchise. In 2015, Kathleen Kennedy confirmed that Lucasfilm would eventually make another Indy film, and by the end of the year, Kennedy, Spielberg, and Ford had discussed a couple of story ideas. Big news came a year later in March of 2016, with an official release date of July 19th of 2019 being announced, with Ford reprising his role and Spielberg directing once again. David Koepp was attached as the screenwriter, who had previously penned the script to Crystal Skull and a plethora of other iconic films such as Mission Impossible and Jurassic Park. There were reports that George Lucas was not involved with the sequel, to which Spielberg disputed, saying this: "George is going to be an executive producer on it with me. Of course, I would never make an Indiana Jones film without George Lucas. That would be insane." However, by the end of 2016, it was confirmed that Lucas would have no involvement with the film at all. Bad news came in 2017, as it was announced the film had been pushed back to July 10th of 2020, as Spielberg was busy making The Post and Ready Player One. Principal photography was scheduled to begin in April of 2019, but it never took place since a script could not be greenlit in time. The release date was pushed back once again to July 9th of 2021, and Jonathan Kasdan was brought in to rewrite the script. However, in May of 2019, Kasdan had left the project, and several months later, Koepp rejoined as the writer. He ended up writing 2 different versions of the film, but neither were approved, since Spielberg, Ford, and Disney could not all agree on the same one. The project really went off the rails in February of 2020, when Spielberg left as the director, opting to just produce the picture. So the sequel desperately needed a new director, and by Ford's suggestion, James Mangold was brought on as the new director. Initially, Mangold was going to turn down the directing offer, as Disney wanted to begin shooting 6 months after he signed on, to hit that 2021 release date. However, after the release date was delayed to July 29th of 2022 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Mangold had the time he wanted to properly work on the film. Additionally, with Mangold joining the project, work began on a new script alongside screenwriters Jez and John Henry Butterworth. Koepp left once again, however, he still has a screenwriting credit as inspiration was taken from one of his early drafts. Bringing Ke Huy Quan to reprise his role as Short Round was briefly considered during the writing process, but according to Mangold, they couldn't find a natural way to put him into the story. Here's a quote: "If you notice, the only person we follow through the whole way is Indy himself, joined by Helena, and I felt we needed to have a female lead who challenged him. But we looked at all these different things and tried to figure out how they would work. I just didn't want another adult along for the adventure." Now personally, I don't agree with this reasoning, as Indy always has other adults joining him on adventures. This is really unfortunate because I would have loved to see this character again, and Ke Huy Quan is such a great actor. But it is what it is. An end credit scene featuring Short Round was also considered, but also not followed up on. Casting went underway in 2021, with familiar actors reprising their roles such as Karen Allen and John Rhys-Davies, and new actors to the franchise such as Antonio Banderas, Mads Mikkelsen, and Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Principal photography kicked off in June of 2021, shooting in Pinewood Studios in England. Location shooting also took place all over the world, in Scotland, Italy, and Morocco, just to name a few. While filming, the production ran into quite a few hiccups. COVID restrictions caused filming locations to get moved several times. Harrison Ford injured his shoulder during a stunt, which delayed production for a time, and a crew member was found dead in his hotel room while shooting in Morocco, although Disney said his death was not production related. Due to these troubles, the film was pushed back for a fifth and final time to June 30th of 2023. Production finally wrapped in February of 2022, where it was then sent off to post-production. John Williams returned to compose the score. Additionally, songs by David Bowie, the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones were used in various scenes and promotional material. According to Forbes, by the end of production, the film had the insanely high price tag of $326 million. Let me repeat that. $326 million. When adjusted for inflation, this made Dial of Destiny the 11th most expensive movie of all time. And this isn't even factoring in the marketing, distribution, or the theater's cuts. Collider estimated that this film needed to make $600 million in order to break even, and $800 million in order to be considered a financial success. So this film had an impossible task ahead of it. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny hit theaters on June 30th of 2023 for an opening weekend gross of $60 million, debuting at number 1 in the box office. In the US, it went on to make $174 million, and overseas, it made $209 million for a total worldwide gross of $383 million. It's estimated that the film lost Disney a total of $143 million, making it the third largest box office bomb of 2023, only beaten out by The Flash and The Marvels. As for the reviews, they ranged from mixed to mostly positive. The film currently holds a fresh 70% critic and 87% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. It also has a 6.5 out of 10 on IMDb and a 2.9 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Honestly, these reviews kinda surprised me, as I thought the film was pretty lackluster. I suppose in a vacuum the story is decent, but when you attach it to the other films in the franchise, it totally fails in every aspect. But we'll dive more into this later. First, we need to analyze how and why this film failed commercially. There are so many things that went wrong with Dial of Destiny, which resulted in it bombing. Let's start off with the rollout of the film, which was terribly mismanaged. Disney made the decision to debut the film at the Cannes Film Festival 1 month before it was released in theaters, which would be a good decision if it was a great movie. But since the movie is divisive, it led to poor initial reviews and word of mouth. Here's a quote from Collider, which I think perfectly sums up this poor decision. Simply put, the film was not made for the target audience, especially of the critical body of Cannes. Films that are met with critical acclaim at Cannes hold vastly different aspirations than a crowd-pleasing blockbuster in an Indiana Jones movie. Naturally, the critics, who are more inclined to films like previous Palme d'Or winners, The Tree of Life and Parasite, were very sour on Dial of Destiny. When leading up to the release of a huge film like this one, momentum is the name of the game. You need to have the hype and social media buzz to ensure fans will show up to the theater. When these first reviews dropped and the film held a disastrous 44% on Rotten Tomatoes, it halted all momentum surrounding the film. Eventually, that score would go up to 70% as more reviews flooded in, but by then the damage was already done for many people. It also doesn't help that everyone who wasn't at Cannes had to wait several weeks to see the film for themselves. So of course, many online outlets and personalities went wild smearing the film before it even hit theaters. I mean, it goes without being said, but this movie just cost way too much money. This huge budget could have been avoided with some changes to the script, but alas, spectacle is more important than a good story apparently. Like, did we really need this chase sequence in downtown New York with 1,000 extras? Did we really need this 25-minute opening sequence with de-aged Harrison Ford surrounded by CGI explosions? Did we really need the time-traveling ending with a huge sea battle happening? It's no wonder this film cost so much money with all these giant action set pieces. And then there's smaller things like the Beatles needle drop. Don't get me wrong, The Beatles are the greatest band of all time, but their songs have famously high price tags for licensing that can range from 6 to 7 figures. And of course, COVID restrictions also caused this budget to be much bigger than it would have been outside the pandemic. We also have to consider that this is a brand that has hardly been touched since 2008. When Disney bought Lucasfilm, they went hog wild with Star Wars, with all the movies, spin-off movies, live-action shows, animated shows, books, comics, video games, and everything under the sun. But they did jack diddly squat with the Indiana Jones IP. And then, when they drop a film a decade and a half after the last one, they expect it to do huge numbers. It's absolutely insane to me that Disney did close to nothing with this brand for so long, given how much they milk their other properties. In 2024, we got the game Indiana Jones in the Great Circle, and although I haven't played it, from what I've gathered, it was pretty well received. This is a game that should have come out before Dial of Destiny, so at least the property would still be in the cultural zeitgeist. Disney didn't nurture this brand to ensure that it appealed to new and younger generations. And this is evident if you take a look at the demographics of who were buying tickets to see Dial of Destiny. It's reported that in its opening weekend, 42% of ticket buyers were 45 and older, including 23% which were 55 and older. This is very odd, as normally this demographic of 55 and older might only make up 5% of ticket sales for this type of tentpole blockbuster film. Additionally, only around a quarter of the film's opening weekend audience was under the age of 25. You can make money by only appealing to older demographics. I mean, it happens all the time. But if you need to gross $800 million in order to make profit, you need to bring everyone to the theater. And this ties into the appeal of Harrison Ford as an action star in the modern age. Don't get me wrong, Ford is one of the best to ever do it, but for the younger demographics, an 80-year-old action star doesn't have that much appeal. It also doesn't help that a portion of fans had already fallen off the hype train when it came to this franchise, whether it's because they didn't enjoy Crystal Skull, or if they didn't want to see Dial since Spielberg wasn't directing it, or other reasons. Many people got the sense that this wasn't worth the price of admission, and they would just catch it on streaming after the fact. And of course, there's other factors which were impacting the movie industry as a whole in 2023 and still persist to this day. These being high ticket prices, the fact that these movies will be hitting streaming in 3 months anyways, and audiences becoming more selective on what they want to watch. Not to mention theaters were still trying to bounce back from the pandemic. There was also a fair amount of competition around the time Dial hit theaters, particularly in the month of July, where Dial of Destiny had to contend with Insidious: The Red Door, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, and the cultural phenomenon of Barbenheimer. Obviously, it would have succeeded if it came out a couple years after Crystal Skull, had Spielberg's name, and a younger Harrison Ford. For how much hate Crystal Skull gets, it still made $786 million. So at that point of time, the hunger for more indie films was still there. But by 2023, it was all dried up. Anyways, now I would like to offer up some of my personal thoughts on the film and explain why exactly I think it's the worst Indiana Jones movie. I have a lot to say about Dial of Destiny because this film is very impactful to me and my life. First off, the original Indiana Jones trilogy are my favorite movies of all time, and this is a character I deeply care about. Raiders of the Lost Ark is the movie that made me fall in love with movies. Additionally, Dial of Destiny is one of the biggest contributing factors why I have this channel at all. When I saw this in 2023, it upset me so much that I had to make a video talking about it. Over a year later, I have this channel where I get to talk about movies, and a fan base that actually wants to hear my thoughts, which I am eternally grateful for. So even though I didn't enjoy this movie, this channel's existence is a silver lining in the whole experience. Before I tear this film apart, let me acknowledge the good, as I think every film can have redeeming qualities, even movies that break my heart like this one. As to be expected, Harrison Ford is great. You can tell he has a lot of love for this character, and it's a shame the script isn't helping him at all. Also, John Williams' score is amazing as always. I'm also a big fan of Voller, who I think is a really interesting character. Mads Mikkelsen is killing it, and there are a lot of good moments that involve him. Although that moment when he gets hit off the train is ridiculous. Bro should have been toast after that. But this is the same universe with the fridge nuke, so I guess I shouldn't complain about stuff like this. Even though I'm not a fan of the whole time travel angle, that scene where Voller realizes he screwed up and Indiana Jones is laughing at him is fantastic and the best scene in the movie. That feels like a classic Indy moment. I just wish we could have seen more of that type of thing. There's also sections of this movie which are fun and competently made. I think the middle of the film is the strongest and where the story flows the best, as I didn't like the beginning and I absolutely hated the ending, which leads into the negatives. This movie runs into the same problem that can be found in another Lucasfilm turned Disney product, Star Wars. In both these franchises, the filmmakers had to devolve the characters in order to manufacture conflict. Luke Skywalker goes through an entire 3-film arc in the original trilogy, where he becomes a Jedi and defeats the Empire. But in the sequel trilogy, his new Jedi Order is destroyed off-screen, and he goes into hiding, no longer being the great Jedi he became. And then, the Empire is suddenly back. The same thing happened to Obi-Wan in the Kenobi show. Obi-Wan has already gone through an entire character arc in the prequel trilogy that has progressed him to the point that we see him in A New Hope. However, the showrunners had to devolve the character so that they could make the show take place between the prequels and the original trilogy. Just like what Disney did to these Star Wars characters, they also had to devolve the character of Indiana Jones in order to squeeze more narrative juice out of a character who has already completed his central arc. Even though Kingdom of the Crystal Skull wasn't the greatest movie ever, it sent off the character pretty well. His adventuring days are done and he can finally settle down with Marion Ravenwood and start a proper family with his son Mutt. In Dial of Destiny, this is completely undone, and to make matters worse, it is undone off-screen. It's basically telling the audience that the emotional journey he goes on through those films doesn't matter. Not only is it an insult to the character, but it's also an insult to the fans. I respect the bold choice of taking this character in a dark direction, but it is so upsetting as a longtime fan. It's tough to watch a depressed old Indiana Jones go on this grand adventure which he is far too old for. I mean, Harrison Ford's age in Crystal Skull was pushing the suspension of disbelief, and this film comes out 15 years after that. They try to recapture some of this prime Indy action with the opening of the film that uses the de-aging technology. But this technology still hasn't been perfected yet, and so much of it looks weird. Additionally, they are using Harrison Ford's voice now, which of course sounds like an 80-year-old man. So we have young Ford's face with old Ford's voice, and it doesn't match up. But really, this entire de-age section was unnecessary, or at least way too long. One of the biggest draws of the Indy films is the action set pieces. These films are revolutionary in pushing the boundaries of action and stunts on screen. Each Indiana Jones movie has an iconic chase sequence that you can remember. Raiders has the truck chase, Temple of Doom has the minecart chase, Last Crusade has the tank chase, even Crystal Skull has a great motorcycle chase. Dial of Destiny tried to recapture this with the tuk-tuk chase, but it just fell flat. And why is that? Could it be the messy camera work, the over-reliance on CGI, the lack of stakes or personal connection? Well, it's all of it. To be fair, there are a handful of good moments of action that can be found in Dial, but it's nowhere near the magic of the original films. That's because they actually sent these madmen to perform these stunts. Harrison Ford and his stunt doubles were literally hanging on the front of a moving truck, and it's in one long unbroken take. I know for Dial of Destiny they couldn't do things like this due to Ford's age, but that doesn't mean they still can't make the action look good. If you see behind the scenes photos and videos, Harrison Ford is still doing a lot of his own stunts in this movie, which is very impressive. However, barely any of these stunts translated well to the screen. It doesn't help that there's this weird tint over the movie. Seriously, why does the color correction look like this? Personally, I think this movie is visually messy, and a big factor is the yellow tint and the weird little vignette effect they threw on the picture. Am I crazy, or does this color correction look bad to anyone else? One big thing I noticed when rewatching the Indiana Jones franchise for this video is that Spielberg has a certain visual comedy style that is prevalent in all the Indy films. And this visual comedy is vacant from Dial of Destiny, which results in the film missing a lot of charm. Then there's the issue of Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character. I don't hate Phoebe Waller-Bridge as much as a lot of the internet seems to, as I think she has made some great stuff in the past. She's a talented actor and writer when given proper material to suit her style, but she didn't really work for this project. She is meant to be a foil for Indy for a majority of the film, but she just came off as annoying. And listen, I get she's written to be that way, but you can make a character annoying while still making them enjoyable to watch and resonate with the audience. Her character is very reminiscent of Mac in Crystal Skull, which is another character that I just didn't enjoy. Although, I think she is better written than Mac and her character arc is better done. And then there's the character of Teddy. I'll be honest, I totally forgot this kid even existed until I rewatched this movie. That just goes to show how big of an impression he leaves. He offers very little to this film and just eats up screen time from other interesting characters. This is not a fault of the actor, but rather the writing. I also found that bit at the end where they threw in that drunk pilot just so they could get back home after time traveling to be very lazy writing. It's also worth noting that Dial of Destiny is the longest Indiana Jones film at 2 hours and 30 minutes. That is almost 30 minutes longer than any other Indiana Jones movie. Yet, with this longer runtime, it still feels like so much less happens compared to the other films. This is because there are so many useless side characters and side plots that take up the screen time, like the CIA people, Teddy, and I hate to say it, but Antonio Banderas' character. He's a great actor, but he offers very little to the story. I'm starting to get into nitpicking territory, but another big gripe I have with this movie is that the main villains don't get a face-melting type death. One of the staples of these films is seeing Nazis die horrible deaths that come from their own ego, and this film was not very creative with their death scenes. In the past, we've seen villains' faces melt, get torn apart by crocodiles, age in a matter of seconds, and get their eyeballs burnt out by interdimensional beings. But in this movie, Voller just gets shot and his plane crashes. There's no supernatural or mythical powers that cause him to die, he just dies in a plane crash. I mean, come on, where's the creativity? Speaking of time travel, that's another point where I think this movie dropped the ball. When it comes to Indiana Jones, there's a certain level of suspension of disbelief. This series has not prided itself on being the most realistic, but it's always leaned into the mythical and biblical territory when it comes to the artifacts. A big point of criticism with Crystal Skull was the presence of the aliens/interdimensional beings. A lot of people felt the aliens in that movie didn't fit the tone or the world of Indiana Jones very well. I have similar thoughts about the time travel in this movie. Aliens and time travel are just so intertwined with the science fiction genre, they feel pretty out of place in the Indiana Jones world, in my opinion. The ending of this movie is what solidified it as my least favorite Indy film and really upset me. At the end of the film, after they have time traveled back to ancient Rome, Indiana decides he wants to stay in the past. However, Helena wants Indiana to come back to the present to be there for her and for Indiana's family. And this moment in the film is usually when the main character makes an important choice to show the lessons they have learned over the course of the story. Think about The Last Crusade, when Indiana is stuck dangling above an abyss. He's holding on to his father, but the Holy Grail is nearly in reach. In this moment, he makes the decision to choose his father over the Grail. He chooses his family over his own selfish desire. In Dial of Destiny, he is faced with a similar moral quandary. He can choose to go back to the modern day and be there for his family, or he can choose to live in the past for his own selfish desire. What separates Dial of Destiny from The Last Crusade is that Indiana doesn't get to make this decision for himself. The choice is made for him. Indiana is knocked out by Helena, and then the movie fades to black. When we return, they are back in the present and everything is back to normal. Indiana doesn't get to show us the character growth that he's experienced over the past 2.5 hours. The movie just tells us he's changed. It's very upsetting to see our main character get robbed of his agency in his own story. And then the whole ending with Marion and Indy where they make up does not hit the emotional beats it needs to because we already see them reconcile in Crystal Skull. Like I said earlier, they devolve the characters so they can hit the same emotional beats, but they just do it worse the second time around. And this is why the film feels so unnecessary. It doesn't really add anything new to the Indiana Jones character apart from his son dying off screen. It makes you wonder what the point of the movie was. The short answer is money, but as we discussed earlier, they also failed on that front. Dial of Destiny does not feel like an Indiana Jones movie. It feels like a mediocre adventure movie that happened to have some of the same characters from the Indiana Jones franchise. Sala and Marion just kind of show up in the story when they don't really have a purpose to, which is just lazy nostalgia bait at that point. I had my hopes that this movie was going to be good, as it had a lot of great things working for it. In theory, this was a really talented cast and crew. We had Harrison Ford excited to return to the role, we had John Williams back for the score, and we had talented new actors like Mads Mikkelsen and Phoebe Waller-Bridge coming to the franchise. We even had James Mangold directing, who has a track record of making great films. Yet, none of these aspects clicked together to form a cohesive picture. I really wanted to like Dial of Destiny, but the filmmakers fumbled the bag at every turn, and the whole movie just felt pointless. I'm not trying to sound like a butthurt fanboy, but when a piece of media means so much to you like the Indiana Jones franchise does to me, then it truly breaks your heart. And again, this movie does have a lot of redeeming qualities, but at the end of the day, it feels so unnecessary and out of place in the Indiana Jones franchise. Alright, I think I've beat this film to death. Let's wrap it up. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is a film that should have either came out 10 years ago or should not have been made at all. After being rescheduled time after time, it finally went into production during the pandemic, where it went on to become one of the most expensive movies of all time. And even though it got decent reviews and made over $300 million, it still wasn't enough to turn a profit, and Disney lost over $100 million on this thing. Not only was it a commercial flop, but in my opinion, it was the most disappointing movie of 2023 and the worst in the Indiana Jones franchise. In another world, maybe it could have been good, but what's done is done, and we can't go back in time. So that's the long and complicated story on why Dial of Destiny failed so spectacularly. But what are your opinions on the film? Do you think it was great, terrible, or just okay? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This has been Tom from Isenhart Productions, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week. And here's a clue of next week's video.
Don't you worry, sad little girl. The A-Team will get your beloved kitty down. Ready, boys?